They said the frontier hardened every heart, but no one ever spoke about the moments that quietly broke them open. The day a child whispered, "We need a mother," and reached toward a woman in chains. Nothing in Birch Point stayed the same. Before the late afternoon could fully surrender to evening, Birch Point lay wrapped in that familiar, uneasy calm. Weathered wooden buildings leaned toward the narrow street like tired men, listening for trouble. Hitching posts stood crooked in the dust. Wagons creaked as the last traders made their slow rounds. And somewhere beyond the row of storefronts, a blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady, lonely rhythm. Dry wind slid along the road, lifting pale curtains of dust that clung to boots, coats, and tired hems. It was the kind of quiet that made small sounds feel heavy, the kind that never lasted long in a town built on movement and leaving. John Calder stepped through the wide doorway of the blacksmith shop, adjusting his coat as the heat of the forge gave way to the cooler air outside. His talk about winter repairs still echoed faintly in his ears, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He carried himself with the measured weight of a man who spoke only when words mattered. Rope burns crossed his hands, scars layered over older scars, each one earned from years of ranch labor that never truly ended. His face held the steady endurance of someone who had learned how to outlast hardship rather than challenge it. Since the day his wife had died, shortly after their youngest daughter was born, every hour of his life had revolved around two purposes: holding the ranch together and keeping his girls safe in a world that rarely softened for anyone. He lowered his hat slightly and scanned the street. The girls were where he had left them, near the watering trough across from the shop. Their small figures stood close together. Leah, the older one, always seemed to pull inward when something unsettled her. Shoulders drawn tight, hands often folded as if to keep herself from reaching. June, 2 years younger, leaned forward openly, boots already dusted white, eyes alive with questions she didn't yet know how to shape. John crossed the street with steady steps, already sensing that something had captured them. Then he saw her. A trader's wagon rested a short distance away, one wheel braced with a loose stone. Chained to that wheel stood a woman. Her wrists were locked in iron cuffs polished by hard use, links drawn short enough to limit her movement. She looked to be in her mid-20s, perhaps a little older, and though her clothing was torn and her beadwork damaged, the pattern still spoke clearly of Apache hands from farther south. Long black hair hung tangled down her back. Dirt streaked her arms and cheekbones, yet her posture remained upright, controlled, guarded. The only visible injuries were the raw rings of skin where iron had pressed too long. John studied her without moving closer. Her breathing was uneven, not with fear but exhaustion. Slowly, her gaze shifted across the street and settled on his daughters. She didn't turn away. She didn't speak. She simply watched them, measuring, listening, trying to understand what they wanted from her. Something tightened in John's chest. He had seen cruelty often enough, but seeing a woman bound in the open street of a town, he brought his children to carried a different weight. He glanced toward the trader, leaning against the wagon's sideboard. The man reeked of cheap whiskey. His coat was patched and stained, his balance slightly off. He greeted passers-by with a careless grin, the kind that never quite reached the eyes. June stepped closer without realizing it. She tugged gently at John's sleeve, never looking away from the woman. "Pa," she whispered. "She looks hurt." Leah swallowed, fingers tightening together. "She's alone," she added quietly. John felt the truth of it settle deep. His daughters were not children who spoke easily about what they wanted. Life had taught them early to weigh their needs against what their father already carried. The concern in their voices now was immediate and unfiltered. It told him how deeply the sight had reached them. The trader noticed John approaching and straightened with clumsy enthusiasm. "Good deal today," he said, words slurred at the edges. "Picked her up near Dry Hollow. Tough one?"
Quiet, too.
"Doesn't fight. I'll make you a fair price." John ignored the tone. He moved closer to the woman, keeping his pace slow so she could follow every intention. She didn't flinch when he crouched to examine the cuffs. The iron bit into bruises that had formed over days, not hours. Her eyes tracked his hands with careful focus. She was trying to decide what kind of man he was. "Why is she chained?" John asked. The trader shrugged. "Easier that way. Folks pay more when they see they don't run. Cold anger settled in John's stomach, but he kept it buried. He reached into his pouch and counted out the bills without bargaining. The trader blinked, surprised by the lack of resistance. Then greed overtook confusion and he snatched the money. John knelt again and worked the lock. He kept his movements steady, deliberate. When the cuffs finally fell free, the woman released a sharp breath. Not relief, release. She flexed her fingers slowly, feeling circulation return, then lifted her eyes to his. For the first time, he saw more than endurance. There was caution there, and curiosity. He turned to his daughters. "Get the spare blanket from the saddlebag." They hurried off. The woman remained still, watching the road, the children, the way Birch Point stretched behind them. She looked ready to flee at the first sign of deceit, yet too drained to make it far. John guided her toward his horse. She followed without leaning on him, though each step took effort. Her body carried dehydration and strain, but her discipline never cracked. Once mounted, she sat behind him, hands, gripping the saddle horn lightly for balance. She didn't touch him otherwise. John respected that and adjusted his posture so the horse moved as smoothly as possible. Leah and June rode beside them on their small mare, glancing back again and again, as if afraid the town might reach out and take the woman back. As Birch Point slipped behind them, the woman lifted her face toward the open land ahead. She didn't know where they were going, yet she stayed. John felt responsibility settle once more across his shoulders. He had spent years avoiding decisions that brought strangers onto his land. But today, he had seen something in her endurance that mirrored the quiet strength he tried to raise in his daughters. The trail stretched across open ground, where dry grass moved like shallow water. The ride was slow, not from distance, but care. John wanted no sudden jolt to send her slipping. He felt her adjust carefully whenever the horse shifted. She remained silent, alert whenever the land changed shape. Leah and June rode ahead now, eager, hooves tapping a light rhythm. They glanced back often. Each time the woman's gaze met theirs, a trace of tension left their shoulders. By the time the fence yard came into view, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. The ranch stood calm, shaped by years of steady work. A modest house with a deep porch faced the barn and corral. The lantern John left burning during town trips glowed faintly. He dismounted first and handed the reins to Leah. "Walk her to the post." The woman remained seated, studying the property. John approached her. "Take your time." She lowered herself carefully, corrected a brief wobble, then stepped back from the horse. June watched, wide-eyed. "She's strong," she whispered. The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Inside is warmer," John said. She scanned the yard, the barn doors ajar, the empty corral, the stacked wood. She measured distance, exits, shadows. Only when satisfied did she step toward the porch. The girls rushed ahead and pushed the door open. She stopped at the threshold, resting her hand on the frame, testing its solidity. John waited. After a moment, she stepped inside. Warmth, wood smoke, the faint scent of stew met her. A simple table by the window, stacked blankets, a rocking chair that hadn't been used in years, a lantern beside an unfinished carving. She took it in without comment. "You can sit," John said. She stayed near the wall by the door. The girls climbed onto the bench, whispering. John filled a tin cup with warm water and set it within reach. She hesitated, then drank slowly. "There's a small room in back," he said. "It has a bed." She followed him down the narrow hall, keeping distance. He opened the door. A narrow bed, a folded blanket, a small window. "You can leave the door open," he added. She met his eyes. For the first time, something shifted. Not trust, but recognition. She left the door ajar. Back in the main room, June leaned against him. "Is she staying?" "Just tonight," he said, though he didn't know if that was true. As the house settled into quiet, John stood at the window, watching darkness gather over the land. He felt his purpose widening, reshaping. Down the hall, the woman lay awake, listening. For the first time in months, her wrists were free. And for now, that was enough. Morning settled slowly over the Calder ranch, pale light stretching across the yard, touching the barn boards and the fence rails like something careful, almost hesitant. John had already been awake for some time when he noticed movement in the back room. The door stood open just as it had been left. The woman sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, her posture straight, her hair still loose and dark over her shoulders. She had not slept deeply, but that much was clear. Her eyes carried the quiet strain of someone who had learned to rest without ever fully letting go of the world around her. She rose when she saw him, not in alarm but in readiness. "You can come into the kitchen," John said. "The stove's warm." She followed at a measured pace. The girls appeared moments later. June first, still half in a dream, Laya behind her, already awake enough to study the woman's face for any sign of change. Breakfast was simple, biscuits preserved. Fruit coffee. John placed a plate near the woman, without pushing it into her hands. She waited a second, then reached for it. Hunger won over caution, though she ate slowly, controlled, as if afraid of what taking too much might invite. "Do you like it here?" June asked softly. The woman paused, then gave a small nod. That was all it took. June smiled as if she had been given a gift. Afterward, John gathered his coat and tools. "I'll be working outside. You can stay in or come out. Your choice." For a long moment she did neither. Then she stood and followed him. Daylight revealed what the dark had hidden: the open land, the order of the place, the absence of other men. She took it in carefully, noting where fences ended, where the ground dipped, where a person could run if they had to. Inside the barn, the horses shifted and snorted softly. Her attention sharpened instantly. She did not approach them. She watched, read them. "She's gentle," John said, nodding toward the mare. The woman stepped closer, slow, extending her hand only after the animal had settled. When the mare accepted her scent, something in the woman's shoulders loosened. She rested her fingers briefly against the horse's neck, just long enough to confirm something she already knew. Animals did not lie. She helped after that, not because she was asked, because work gave her something solid to stand in. She carried water, moved hay, sat quietly nearby while John repaired a loose board. She never put herself where she could be trapped, but she stayed. The girls drifted around her like cautious birds, not touching, just near. Laya eventually brought her a brush and held it out. The woman studied it, then accepted. She brushed the mare's coat in slow, practiced strokes, the motion almost reverent. June watched, wide-eyed. "She knows horses," she whispered. John saw it too, and something else, a patience that wasn't taught, a steadiness that came from surviving more than one kind of loss. Near midday, John brought out water and bread. They sat on the low fence rail. The woman drank, then surprised him by speaking for the first time. "My name is Istli." The word was soft, but it landed with weight. "I'm John," he said. "These are my daughters, Laya, June." She nodded once to each of them. They sat in silence after that, but it was no longer the silence of distance. It was the silence of people learning the edges of one another. Days passed. Istli did not ask where she was. She did not ask what John expected. She rose with the sun, helped where she could, watched the land, watched the girls. The bruises on her wrists faded slowly. The guardedness in her eyes faded slower. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west, sudden and loud. Thunder cracked across the hills. June startled and ran straight into Istli's side before she could stop herself. Istli froze. For one breath, two, then she lowered herself to the floor and wrapped her arms around the child. June did not pull away. She stayed there, head pressed into Istli's shoulder, while the thunder passed overhead. John watched from the doorway. Something deep and unfamiliar tightened behind his ribs. Later that night, Laya stood beside Istli at the table, twisting her fingers together. "We don't have a mother," she said quietly. Istli looked at her. June joined them. "We need one." The words were not dramatic. They were not loud. They were honest. The room felt suddenly too small for the weight of them. Istli's breath caught. She lowered herself to the girl's height. Her hands hovered, unsure, before settling lightly on their shoulders. "I cannot replace what you lost," she said. "We don't want replaced," June answered. "We want someone who stays." Silence filled the space between them. John did not move. He did not rescue the moment. He let it become what it needed to be. Istli's voice was quiet. "I do not know how to be what you ask." Laya lifted her chin. "We can learn." The storm had long passed, but something else had begun. Weeks turned into months. Isley learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way the land breathed, the way the girls argued and forgave, the way John carried grief without speaking its name. She told him one night by the fire of the raid that had taken her from her people, of the long road north, of the chain that had taught her how thin the line was between living and being owned. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said only, "No one will ever chain you here." She studied him a long time. "I know." The town heard rumors. Some were kind, some were not. Once a man rode up asking questions. John met him at the fence. The man left. After that, no one came. Spring greened the hills. June laughed more easily. Lyra began to sleep without the lamp. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Isley would sit with the girls pressed into her sides, one hand resting protectively on each small back, as if afraid that if she let go, something might still take them. One evening, as the sun sank red and wide behind the ridge, they stood together at the fence. The land stretched open and endless. "You can leave," John said. "Any day, any time." Isley did not answer at first. Then she reached out and took June's hand. Lyra's fingers closed around her other. "I'm not where I was taken," she said. "I am where I chose to remain." John nodded. He did not call her wife. She did not call him husband. But that night, when June fell asleep against her chest and Lyra curled at her side, and John watched them from the doorway, the house felt whole in a way it never had before. And in the quiet of the ranch, under a sky that had seen more endings than beginnings, something broken did not return to what it had been. It became something new. The frontier hardened many hearts, but sometimes, if the right people stood close enough, it also built them.